There's something for every imagination at your local comic shop. Visit comicshoplocator.com to find a store near you.
Imagine being at a convention and going to an interview panel that's just for you. No bustling crowds, no hours-long lines, just you, the moderator, and your favorite comic book creators. Well, this is pretty much that. Miss Jen sits down every week with 2 comic book creators for a live stream interview about their latest work, and you can ask them whatever you want. It's Talking Shop, Mondays at 5 Eastern on The Experience, Comic Culture and Sales.
Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the Dan Wickline Show. Today we are going to be talking about this cinematic masterpiece that is Spider-Man: No Way Home. I know that poor Kyle is on the switchboard going, "Oh, God." Kyle, I don't believe, was the biggest fan of the movie. Though, from his level, this is actually a decent movie from what I saw of his writing of it. 1.75 out of 5, which is one of his higher grades. Yeah.
All right, I'm here.
Okay.
I'm just going to join you for this, I guess.
So you saw? Okay.
Yes, I did see it.
Okay.
Despite my better judgment.
Yeah. I got to go see it at 9:45 a.m. yesterday.
You know, if I had seen it at 9:45 in the morning, I might have rated it a 0 out of 5. Like, I had to have had a few cups of coffee and like 2 meals and several things before I saw it to make me as happy as I was when I saw it.
Now, I went up to the desert this weekend to see Lisa and the kids, and went up on Saturday, ended up spending Saturday. There was a family thing Sunday night, and she's like, "You're staying for that, aren't you?" Well, I wasn't planning on it, but so I ended up staying an extra day. And then my plan was to go see Spider-Man on Monday, and they're like, "Well, we want to go see it." I'm like, well, if you want to go at really freaking early in the morning before I head down the hill, then because it's a 90-mile drive.
Yeah.
So, you know,
and in California, 90 miles is like a day and a half.
Yeah.
Out here, 90 miles. I drove 450 miles this weekend.
Mm-hmm.
Like, and still was able to see Spider-Man and go to an art show and like take 2 naps.
Yeah. Yeah. But yeah, so we went at 9:45 a.m. and saw all the trailers and then saw the movie and stayed for the post credits and the mid credit. And I will tell you, Lisa says this is the best Spider-Man movie she's ever seen, and she's seen all of them. And both the kids were just enamored with the movie. They thought it was great.
I will stop just short of saying that.
Mm-hmm.
In that, I still think Spider-Man 2, the original Tobey Maguire Spider-Man 2, is better. However, I am now going to go back through and watch the other 2 Tom Holland Spider-Man movies. And, you know, and looking at it as a work of the whole, it may be able to move it up.
I know a lot of people absolutely love the second Sam Raimi Spider-Man movie, second Tobey Maguire movie.
Macho Man was in it.
And where I liked it, I had a problem with it in that the plot was almost identical to the first Spider-Man movie. They took all the same beats and just redid it. Mind you, they did it with a more sympathetic villain. And that probably is the key difference. But the fact that it was the same movie bothered me enough that it's not that high on my list.
And I would just point out to those of you out there, read anything before Spider-Man 300. And they basically rehash the same plot every 3 or 4 months for 300 issues.
Well,
you know, it took Todd
bad.
McFarlane and some of those guys getting in there really shaking things up to get Spider-Man out of kind of a rut that happened, especially after the first 50.
Yeah, see, I'd agree with you, but then there's stuff like Craven's Last Hunt. There's the death of Jean DeWolf.
Right.
I mean, there are some amazing Spider-Man stories.
Certainly. But you get this thing where they're going to introduce a new villain, and he's slightly more sympathetic or less sympathetic. But the introduction's the same. So,
see, I'm a little against what they do with the characters nowadays. I look at some of these comics, and they seem to want change just for change. They want to do change because they think that's what gets people's attention, and they're not writing good stories anymore. You know.
Before we get into the movie, did you see the big change that was announced yesterday?
For
Marvel News-wise, they have yes.
That looks ridiculous.
Yeah, I agree. We're on the same page there, my friend.
Yep. Yeah.
It looks like he's got a unibrow now. Like, that's the only real difference.
Yep. The horns are what's really. See, the thing is that the logo covered up all this space here and then down, and now they've got all this black open space or negative space above the logo and makes it drop down, and it doesn't work.
Right. It's like, are we trying to accentuate his six-pack and his pecs? Like, I don't understand.
It's just not a good logo, and it doesn't fit him,
So,
I mean, they could have just slapped the Mythosaur thing from Mandalorian on there, and it would have been better.
Accurate. 100% accurate. So before you dive into the Spider-Man, and I'm just here for colorful commentary, should we play the spoiler warning? Because I'm sure we have to get spoilery here.
Yeah, that's probably a good idea.
Let's do that.
All right, so we've got the spoiler out of the way. To me, this movie is basically in threes. There's the everything before he goes to see Doctor Strange. There's everything from what happens with Doctor Strange to him trying to collect him and everything. And then there's when the other Spider-Men show up on is kind of how I break the movie down. And just focusing on the first part, the pre-Doctor Strange part, this felt the most like it tied into the previous two movies. It felt a bit rushed. Everything is fine. Just kind of wipe away thing. I really did love Charlie Cox appearing in the movie. I liked the Daredevil moment where the brick comes flying in the window and he catches it. And when and they ask him, well, how'd you do that? And he goes, I'm a very good lawyer. I'm like, I've known some lawyers. Not many of them can catch a flying brick. So,
my lawyer could, but he'd charge you 3 times as much for it.
I could see that.
I just assume let the brick hit me.
But then you could sue the person who threw the brick.
Right, he go get paid either way. But
yeah. So, but yeah, I thought that was really good, and it was great seeing him. I mean, Daredevil has always been my favorite Marvel character. So between that and seeing Vincent D'Onofrio pop up on Hawkeye, I'm like, yay!
I haven't seen episode 5 yet.
Okay, everybody knows.
I honestly,
you'd have to be living under a rock.
I kind of have been. I've been so busy this week and weekend that since Wednesday, I've barely been online. So I got kind of lucky in that I knew it was coming because I recognized the hand in episode 3. I'm like, oh, I know that hand.
Yeah,
I've seen
and the
that man beat
cufflinks.
people up on Law and Order way too much. Like,
Oh yeah, yeah, absolutely.
I know
Yep.
Vincent D'Onofrio's hand like the back of my hand.
He reached for her
So
cheek and went doing doing.
right, exactly. I mean, so I was all right. Like, but it's one of those things is don't spoil anything else. I'm watching it in the morning. So.
Yeah, but and then tonight's the finale.
Well, tonight for
me.
you, right?
Yes.
3 a.m. for me. So I will watch it tomorrow morning.
Now midnight tonight, I'll be sitting on my side of my bed watching it.
If it was midnight here, I'd be watching it tonight, but I'm not going to get up at 3 a.m. to watch it. So,
no, I am ready for the finale on that. But I loved seeing him in it, and I am a huge fan of the Netflix series. I don't so much care if they bring the Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. canon or universe into canon. The Runaways, Legion, or any of the other stuff they did on Hulu, don't really care. The Netflix stuff were really good, and hell, I'd even go so far as I'd love to see Iron Fist show up in the second Shang-Chi movie. Yeah, and even if they keep Finn Jones, that's fine. I don't care, because I thought by the end of season 2 he was coming around.
I concur.
Yeah, and also the episode that he was in of the Luke Cage series, I thought was really cool. With that just focused on the two of them. So, but if they recast him, they recast him. But Charlie Cox, Vincent D'Onofrio, John Bernthal, Jessica, Kristen Ritter are all so good and need to be in the MCU. So and Rob, I think Rob Moran or whatever his name is, who played Turk. We need Turk in the MCU.
See, the problem is you call anyone Turk, and I just think
Turk 182.
No, I think from Scrubs. Donald Faison.
Oh, okay.
But no. So the first third of the movie, the third you're talking about, having not seen the previous two Tom Holland movies, I thought they did a really good job of explaining to me what needed to be explained to me.
Yeah.
There were some things that I'm like, oh, that's a plot hole because I have a knowledge base issue. In terms of Aunt May's job kind of stuff, like what is her role and how is she banging Happy Hogan? Like, I don't quite understand how all this works.
Yeah.
But like it did a good enough job of explaining to me the things I didn't know that it got me enough information that I could follow the rest of the movie.
Yeah, she's with Happy because they met because of Tony's connection to Peter, and then he left Happy to keep an eye on him, and they just kind of became friends and down the line.
Sure. Like, but you know what I'm saying? It's like I can figure that, I can extrapolate that.
Yeah.
But it's I didn't know that going in, so it just plants enough of a seed that I'm like, okay, I can follow this now.
Yeah, no, I think they did a good job catching it up too. I know that Scotland and Braden hadn't seen the other Spider-Man movies. So, I mean, Braden finally went out and watched the Tobey Maguire one, the first one, just before this one. So he knew enough to go into it, but it works on a standalone movie in a sense, They put some people in it just to kind of put a bow on it, to bring the school staff back in, just so that they could say, yeah, they were here, But I did like the juxtaposition between Hannibal Buress's character and the other teacher who's obsessed with Spider-Man compared to the guy who's a conspiracy theory for Mysterio. It was like, that's a nice balance.
Right, so Hannibal Buress versus Martin Starr.
Yeah, was it Martin
was
Starr?
Great. And it's funny because generally if you were casting something, you would flip those two.
Yeah.
Like Martin Starr totally feels in the way he looks and comports himself in this movie like he would totally be into QAnon.
Uh-huh.
And Hannibal Buress would not be, and then they flipped the roles, and I thought it was very funny.
Yeah.
You
You know what surprised me, and this goes through the whole movie, was how much, even when it got to be a very serious movie, they never lost the humor. There was a lightness to the movie and it balanced really well. I mean, okay, huge spoiler here, but the death of Aunt May, but we also got stuff like callbacks to, Max thinking that Spider-Man would have been black, and it's kind of a nod to Miles Morales, stuff like that. We had a lot of humor going on, or Ned being able to use the sling ring, and how he did it and how he can't close it because he doesn't have any training. He's
that coming after he said, my grandmother's always said there's magic in us.
Yes.
His
grandmother was awesome.
Uh-huh.
I loved his grandmother.
Ned's grandma was the best character in the whole movie.
Yeah. Can you clean up the web?
That's exactly it.
Yeah.
And Tobey Maguire and Andrew Garfield like bending over backwards, be like, oh my God, I'm so sorry, Ned's grandma.
Totally Peter Parker. Mm-hmm. Totally in character for both of them.
Absolutely.
Though I did find it interesting when Tobey Maguire came through, Grandma seemed to think he was kind of handsome. Mm-hmm. She was like, oh.
Right.
Yeah. I thought it was interesting. There was a big difference between the scene we got in the trailer with Doctor Strange and the scene we got in the movie. Because there's that whole thing of Wong chastising him. Don't do that spell. It's too dangerous. That's gone. And Doctor Strange lying to, oh, no, we wouldn't do that. Wink. That's all taken out. It didn't make the cut.
So this is something that we could talk about, as we get later on. I have a weird conspiracy theory that I think is going to prove more true than I would like to admit.
You don't think that's Doctor Strange?
I don't think it's from this movie.
Oh.
I think it's footage from a forthcoming film that was put into this trailer to plant seeds of the forthcoming film.
Interesting. Yeah, we'll get to that.
I will also say it right now. I don't consider this the third Spider-Man movie. It's the second Doctor Strange movie.
I think this is a third Spider-Man movie the same way that Civil War is the third Captain America movie or Avengers 2.5.
Or it's really an Iron Man movie, right?
Yeah. So, but yeah, it was good. And I kind of have a hard time looking at these movies as sequels and threequels or whatever they are, because it's just this one big universe. It's just the next chapter, So
right.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's why I like the Matt Murdock appearance, because this movie overall just felt like an old 70s, 80s Marvel comic, or even 60s, where somebody would just show up in the comic, or, hey, is that Thor flying by? Or, oh, I need a lawyer. Well, let me go get Matt Murdock. That's the kind of stuff they did in the comics all the time. And we've had the potential to set that up. We got a little bit of it in the Netflix series. Jerry Hogarth shows up in all the series, that type of thing. Mm-hmm. Foggy Nelson ends up in Luke Cage. And I love seeing it on this scale because it's unprecedented. Movies don't do this. What Marvel is doing, movies don't do. And that is what
else has done it.
Even
maybe
Star
the
Wars.
Ocean's movies.
Yeah, but are they really that big? I mean, you got three of them.
No, but I'm just trying to think of what other movies have kind of had that kind of big extended universe thing where you have people joining and leaving and moving around.
The only thing close would be the scene in Shazam where Superman comes in to have lunch.
Right. But I mean, like the Ocean's movies, I guess, have some of that.
Yeah.
But yeah, nobody has done this. This is, and that's something that, you know, as hard as I am on these films,
Yeah.
I give them a lot of credit for paving the road to a place where no one has gone before in that regard.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, what they've accomplished is amazing. And you look at a movie like this that just canonized two different iterations of a character and all of its villains into this giant MCU already. I mean, that's, and where does that stop? I mean, maybe we're going to get something more, maybe we'll get more of that in upcoming stuff. You know, I mean, once Marvel starts, why stop?
right.
You know, maybe there's a fractured mirror setup where we see multiverse versions of the Fantastic Four and we get each iteration of them. Maybe it's not just a cameo, but, oh, here's the Fan Four Stick group, and here's the Ian Goffard version, and, oh, here's the Roger Corman version for a quickie, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we don't go to that universe. But
Right.
You know,
Like, I mean, so I actually went through and wrote out my review of this movie. And I caveat this by saying to everyone I've sent it to, I thoroughly enjoyed my time at the movies. I thought it was a fun movie. Just because I enjoyed it doesn't make it a good movie.
Yeah.
It is an okay movie.
I disagree, but okay.
And here's what I mean by that. I think that this movie only did half of the work that it set out to do. I think the rest of the homework gets done in Multiverse of Madness.
Okay.
So, much like when I reviewed Infinity War and I gave it like a C, once I watched Endgame, it made Infinity War that much better. And when you watch them two together, it's a significantly stronger pairing.
Yes.
Than either of those films as a standalone movie. So I might have rated this one a little lower because I feel like, hey, you still have a lot to do here. I think there were problems with the script. I think you had the first two acts that were incredibly strong. Phenomenally strong. And then you get to the end, you get to the third act, and it's a little bit, okay, dinner's ready.
Now, see, that I find interesting because just about every review, by the way, hello, Sean. Every review I've seen of this says the exact opposite. They talk about how the first half or the first two acts are muddled and kind of overflowed or too much going on. But the third act is what saves the movie. That it's the best third act they've seen in a movie.
I think the problem with it is that they started in the third act setting up what could be the future for this character. In a world that both Marvel and Sony can really play around in a great big sandbox.
Yeah.
And rather than set it up and put all the bricks down, they walked away from it to set up Doctor Strange. And that would leave you at the end of Bendis's first Spider-Man arc at the end of this movie, where you need the introduction. If they introduce Miles Morales, even in a post-credit scene in this film, this movie is a B. Like, just straight up. I mean, it's 2 whole letter grades better.
Yeah.
In my mind, because now all that work they've done in the third act, which was good, but it was incomplete, is completed, and now you can kind of say, okay, now we have this situation here with this other Spider-Man, and they've set up the future of the character. But instead, they did what I felt Batman versus Superman did, which is make them both look weak in favor of Wonder Woman, who had the next movie coming out.
Now, see, I'm not agreeing with you on this, because I look at the third act and I see it as doing something incredible. It basically gave endings to 2 previous franchises, wrapped up just about all the threads in this franchise, to the point where the slate is clear and the door is wide open, and they gave us the semblance of a conclusion. Now, it's a paper conclusion, because we know that it's going to get carried over into Multiverse of Madness. But if you don't watch Multiverse of Madness, if you didn't know Multiverse of Madness existed, you would get to the end of the movie and think that spell that he did solved the problem. We only know that, if you didn't watch the closing credit scene, and you're not like you and I that lives this stuff, then it has a conclusion. It wrapped up Tom's story. It wrapped up Toby's story. It wrapped up Andrew's story. Andrew got his redemption arc for having Gwen die by saving this MJ. Toby is the much more mature, and he got to go back and save his mentors and stuff that he didn't do when he was Spider-Man. Wasn't able to do when he was younger. And Tom basically got to reset the table, making all the people he loves safe by, well, kind of reverse It's a Wonderful Life. So I think in a lot of ways, it's a great third act.
But I can't divorce the things I know from what I see.
But are you looking at the movie as it is, or are you looking at everything around it and your own expectations?
I had no expectations coming into this movie.
Okay.
But when you know, this is how I felt about it. You've run 99 yards and you're this close to a touchdown, and you just stop on the 1 yard line. What you've done is amazing. You've done a fantastic job, but you haven't finished the job.
So what is it they didn't do?
What I'm saying is if they would have gone ahead and even in a post-credit scene made the introduction of Miles Morales.
Why?
Because that would have gotten you to the end of the Brian Michael Bendis Spider-Man run.
But why is that what they were doing? You're assuming
that's the only thing that makes sense for them to have used as source material for the end of the third act.
Yeah, see,
I struggle to divorce my brain, what I know, from what I'm seeing on screen.
Yeah.
It's why it's much easier for me to go see Shang-Chi and be completely, separated from it, because I don't know a lot about Shang-Chi.
Yeah.
I have a 30-year relationship with Spider-Man that it's been nearly all-consuming. So I've got to judge it differently, because that's how.
But you're judging it because they didn't introduce Miles Morales. We're looking at a character that has been around for 60 years. Okay. Why is it that this iteration of the character has been around for about 6 years, and you already want to jump to basically there's 40 years worth of comic stories out there before Miles Morales ever got introduced?
Sure.
So there's so many Spider-Man stories they could do that have nothing to do with Miles Morales. Why is everybody want to get to these newer characters? The Kate Bishops, the Young Avengers, when there's still so many stories they could tell with the older characters that started this, with the Caps, and everybody seems to want to rush through the 60 great years of 60 years of comics we got with some of the great stories, and get to the modern day, where where all this stuff is changing, where it's just constant change, when you could do another trilogy of Spider-Man movies and still not get to Miles Morales?
Then don't tell me a modern story. They told a modern story. They told a story written by Brian Michael Bendis. Was the very bottom line was a Bendis written Spider-Man story of what they did in this movie. You want me to not feel that way? Give me a David Michelinie story as your baseline, and then adapt it and modify it into what you need.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're going to give me red bricks, I'm going to build you a red brick wall.
Okay,
if you give me, you're giving me an input, which means I expect a certain output. If you give me a different input, I will expect a different output. It's why I had a problem with Civil War. You tell me it's going to be Civil War. I expect Civil War, not some variation on Civil War.
Okay, but here they didn't tell you it was a Brian Michael Bendis story. They didn't tell you Miles Morales was going to come. But that's the level you're holding them up against.
But the second you put 3 Spider-Men in the same room, there's only a handful of stories you can pick from.
But they're not picking from those. This is a John Watts movie.
But I know that this story exists.
Uh-huh. You know whose story this is? This is Kevin Feige's. This is Kevin Feige, who worked on the first 2 Spider-Man movies, consulted on the second 2 Spider-Man movies, and now he's pulling it all together in this group. This is a Kevin Feige story. This has nothing to do with Bendis, there's no source material.
But did Kevin Feige? That's what I'm saying. That's the problem. There is source material. Otherwise, this character doesn't exist.
There's source material, but there's source material from 40 years or 60 years, and you're narrowing it down on your own.
Because whoever wrote this script took parts from this source material and put it into their story. I recognize the writer of this movie wrote a Spider-Man story that he thought needed to be told.
Yeah.
I recognize that.
Mm-hmm.
But their influences are from this source material. If you take an influence from a source material that I recognize that influence from, I expect that influence to carry through.
Yeah.
And when it doesn't, there's a drop off. There just is. Because my Rolodex immediately goes through which stories could this be based on.
But there was no even title on it that should tell you that. There's no Brian Michael Bendis story called No Way Home.
Right, but if I walk into a restaurant and I smell fish,
mm-hmm.
I expect them to serve fish. They don't have to call it the fish restaurant.
Mm-hmm.
I walk into this movie, I sit down, I start watching this movie. I start seeing the writing on the wall as to what source material their story is based on. I expect them to at least continue with that influence.
So what you're saying is that your problem with the film are from your expectations.
Right.
And which is
why it's my review.
Yeah. By the way, I want to jump on what Sean's talking about here. Now, Sean, there's one line here that just throws me off. He says, not to jump too forward, but what you think, I think because they're wanting to be more modern and present, Miles is wildly popular right now, probably the most popular Spider-Man at the moment, so adding him would make sense. Now, I'm going to disagree with you because in comics, if you walk into a comic book shop, maybe Miles Morales is the most popular, maybe not. You go to the general audience, you say, do you know who Spider-Man is? Yes. And you hold up a picture of, who's under the mask. They're probably going to pick Peter Parker. The general populace He's much more popular. He is popular. Hell, I was listening to a fantasy football podcast the other night, and they were talking about two different wide receivers who just happened to have the first name of Miles, and they were trying to decide who they should start on their team. And the guy says, "Yep, of the two Miles, that's the better one." Now, if you had an option of Miles Morales, then you'd want to go with Miles Morales, and the other guy laughed. So they both knew who Miles Morales is. But also, Miles Morales is just a derivation of Peter Parker. There's still Spider-Man. The bottom line is it's the same character. Miles Morales, if he was that popular based on his own character, but he's kind of the first character did all the heavy lifting, and Marvel does that a lot, because if you've noticed, Marvel hasn't really been able to make a lot of brand new popular characters in a long time. I mean, one of the last popular character they were able to create from scratch would be the Punisher. And that was the late 70s.
Spider-Man.
What?
Who came from Spider-Man.
Yeah. From a Spider-Man comic, but he's kind of a unique character. Where the popular characters now are derivations of Spider-Man with Spider-Gwen and Miles Morales Spider-Man and all this other stuff, where they could have given them, Silk, China Moon character, Silk. Very similar, but not that popular. Why? Because she's not Spider-Silk, Spider-Woman 2? I don't know. It's these derivation characters, and when you bring them in, it's like Kate Bishop as Hawkeye. If they would have given her any other name, that would be different. And they do this a lot. They do that in DC as well. Well, now Dick Grayson is Batman. Now this Kyle Rayner is Green Lantern. So it's not that particular character is popular. And we got to remember that what's popular at the comic shop and what's popular in comics is not automatically generated out into the bigger world. So yes, Miles Morales may be very popular in the comic world. But for most people, I mean, just in general, Peter Parker is Spider-Man. Spider-Man wears the red and blue suit, or black sometimes. He doesn't wear, you put him, and Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse did a great job of introducing people to Miles Morales. But again, animated movie fan base is still smaller than like the MCU. So, Deadpool. Deadpool's kind of an interesting one as well, is that his popularity comes from his irreverence, which wasn't necessarily part of the character when he was first created. He was pretty much a Deathstroke clone. They pretty much just copied Deathstroke down to the fact that his name is Wade Wilson and Deathstroke is Slade Wilson. I need that guy going, yeah.
Right. But the last thing I said, Dan, and this will wrap up my kind of what we were kind of arguing about, is that the thing we've learned this year is that it's okay to leave deep cuts in for the hardcore fans. You can be successful while doing it. They did it in WandaVision. They did it in Loki. They did it in the Eternals.
Yep.
And for this movie to paint with such a broad brush, I think that was even more of why I was disappointed in it, because they could have left these little breadcrumbs in for the hardcore fans that would have pacified people like me. And they chose not to.
There was a ton of breadcrumbs.
But not the kind I'm talking about.
No, the kind you're talking about is your expectations, what you think the movie should have been, instead of looking at it for what the movie was.
A prime example of the kind of breadcrumbs they could have left in was maybe an allusion to J. Jonah Jameson's son. The little things that 1% of the people who go see this movie are going to get
Mm-hmm.
on the surface of it. But that's a little bit just for somebody like me to go, that's something I can chew on for the future.
See,
And the breadcrumbs they left in are still even more broad than that.
Yeah, it just feels like you're knocking it as a failure because it didn't live up to the things you wanted in it, which is the same thing that happened with WandaVision, because people didn't like the ending of WandaVision because they didn't get the X-Men's Quicksilver and they didn't get Mephisto when none of that was promised. You know, the X-Men, I could get people on the X-Men Quicksilver bringing the same actor in, but everybody was, oh, it's not Mephisto. Oh my God. Well, they never said it was Mephisto.
Right. And I thought the ending of WandaVision was a redeeming quality of WandaVision. You know, the introduction of the Darkhold. Like,
yeah,
that was a redeeming factor for WandaVision for me, because that's something that not everybody and their brother is going to know. So, you know, that's the kind of stuff I mean. Like, it doesn't have to pay off, doesn't even have to make a ton of sense. But it just gives people like me something to chew on. I mean, I thought it was a fun movie. I enjoyed the movie. I just didn't think it lived up to its potential. Much like me in high school.
Yeah. Like I say, I am going to disagree with you on that. And looking at the scores on like Rotten Tomatoes and stuff like that, I think a lot of people are disagreeing with you on that. It's a very well received and loved movie.
Dan, most people have disagreed with me on every review I've ever given for any of these movies.
That is true.
Just because I'm right doesn't mean they're also not right.
No, and we're talking opinions. That's the thing. We are talking opinions. And it's like cake. I know some people who love German chocolate cake. I can't stand it. I don't like coconut. Yeah.
Right. I'm German and I hate it.
I'm part German and I hate it. So, all right, let me catch up on some of the comments here. Sean says, so the two things for me that I love the most, we're seeing Charlie Cox being introduced. I agree with you. That was one of my favorites too. Daredevil is my favorite hero of all time. Favorite Marvel character, probably my favorite hero of all time. Green Arrow, my favorite DC character. Daredevil is my favorite of all time. And two, seeing Andrew Garfield play Spider-Man again. I liked seeing him back. I think he brought a lot to it. I thought Tobey Maguire was way better than I expected. He brought a lot of
I think this was Andrew Garfield's best Spider-Man portrayal.
Yes.
And I think Tobey Maguire was great. I will say this, something I had said to people before is that I thought Tom Holland was a good Spider-Man and not a great Peter Parker.
Uh-huh.
Just from the things I had seen from the previous films.
Yeah.
The people who are saying that this film really brings it all together, I 100% agree with them. I want to see him keep playing the character for as long as makes sense.
Agreed. I agree with you 100%. I heard somebody else refer to that these three movies are his origin story.
I was kind of hoping they would leave it out.
Well, in a sense, they did. There's no Uncle Ben. I mean,
right.
So Aunt May
turned Aunt May into Uncle Ben, and that bothered me tremendously.
Well, yeah.
And then she misquotes him.
No, she quotes Stan Lee. She pulls the actual quote from the comic, which was never said by Ben.
Right. But then but what I'm saying is she misquotes what we've seen in the previous movies.
Well, yeah, but they went back.
Right.
They went back to the source material.
Right. They made him into they made her into actual Uncle Ben. And I'm like, I don't want her. This is not what I want for her.
Yeah.
Well, but they're doing it correctly, and I'm all kinds of torn.
Yeah, because even in the comic, it's not Uncle Ben who says it, it's the narrator.
Right.
So Sean says, Toby was good Peter Parker and as Spider-Man. Andrew was a good Spider-Man, but as Peter. Tom Holland plays both very well. Yep, I'll give you that.
Andrew was good at neither.
I thought his Spider-Man was
Until
pretty good.
This movie.
I liked his humor as Spider-Man. I thought his one-liners and stuff were probably the best of the three.
Right. Parkour Spider-Man was just not great.
Yeah. So, yeah. All right. So let's talk about the villains. They did some interesting stuff with the villains. I thought the interaction with the villains, they kept the humor going there, even with the villains kind of joking around and them going, "Wait, how is he alive? I watched him die." "Yes, but I watched both of you die." "Really? Oh, oh, and you died too, Doc. Really? I can turn you into a lizard." It was just kind of an interesting mix-up or mashup. And then to have Willem Dafoe actually say the line, "I'm somewhat of a scientist myself."
The memes that have come with that. It's Willem Dafoe in a Lions jacket. "I'm somewhat of a playoff team myself."
Yes.
Just the memes.
Oh, it just, they put in so much of that and so many callbacks. But again, to do all that and it still work is amazing, So that's why I love this movie. I'm not even a huge Spider-Man. I like Spider-Man, but he kind of got overdone in my opinion. I wasn't, the one going, "Oh, we need Spider-Man in the MCU." I was more like, we've had enough Spider-Man for a while. And if I have to watch Uncle Ben die one more time, I mean...
Which is why I didn't like the way they treated Aunt May.
But Uncle Ben's death and Bruce Wayne's parents' death have become the torture porn of comics.
Right. And so, if you're going to kill Aunt May, maybe do it where she's not giving the Uncle Ben line. Like, give her own line, something. Because now we're just watching Uncle Ben die, except that it's Mona Lisa from My Cousin Vinny. If she'd been dying and she had said 4 degrees over top dead center, I would have lost it. It would have been my favorite movie ever. But
I thought her death was played really well. I thought the fact that she's like, "Oh no, I'm fine," and then "I'm not fine," was really heart-wrenching. And then to have Happy pull up at that moment and scream for Peter to run, just, oh man.
Yeah.
I
think that was the high point of the movie. That was a well-played moment. I did, and you and I could talk about this maybe later on our show, because we're down to the last few minutes on this show, and we'll have some time in our show, I'm sure. I talked to a former Marvel editor about the thing I would have changed about this movie, and they thought it was a good idea. So I will tell you how I would have rewritten the third act.
And you'll do that on tonight's show on In Stores This Week at 5:00 Pacific time, 8:00 Eastern. So you'll want to tune in for that, where we'll continue our discussion, it seems, along with talk about some of the books coming out this week. All right, let's get into the final act. But with the villains too, I think the thing that amazes me about this movie is they redeemed just about everybody. Willem Dafoe got to come back and chew up the scenery again in a brilliant way. Alfred Molina came back and was, again, just a great villain. But Jamie Foxx got to come back and actually act and not be a stereotype, and did so much better. Thomas Hayden Church and Risa Fons coming back and just reprising their roles, which I thought was, and the fact that all of this was done as more than just cameos. We expected cameos. We didn't expect to get actual good amount of time with all of these characters. I mean, Tobey Maguire and Andrew Garfield were really major roles in this in a lot of ways. They didn't show up until the third act, but when they did, they were huge. And I think just the acting on everybody around, Zendaya's acting really impressed me. Tom Holland really stepped up his game. But there's so many questions coming out of it. I think we'll spend the last couple of minutes talking about the fallout from this. What does this mean? Now, first thing we've got, and I'm going to talk about the post-credit scene or the mid-credit scene. The fact that Eddie Brock didn't even leave the bar. He got there, started drinking and talking to the guy, never even left the bar, was perfect.
That bartender is played by Crystal Fernandez.
Uh-huh.
Who is Danny Rojas in Ted Lasso.
Yes.
Watch out for him. I think he has the potential to be a big actor and someone who we'll see back in the MCU very soon. Just because he has that skill set.
Okay.
He was a professional soccer player before he became an actor. So he's one of those that can do the athletic-y kind of,
Yeah. But let's look at the fall. So that leaving behind that little drop of the symbiote behind. Again, Lisa's sitting next to me, sees that, and she's not a comic reader. She's watched most of the MCU movies. I think she saw the first Venom movie. She sees that and she goes, uh-oh. Immediately, she knows. She knows where that's going. And for an average, a non-comic geek to catch it, I think just shows how well Marvel is doing with this stuff. But I'm fascinated to see how this is all going to play out. So did everybody forget Peter Parker's existence? So if they knew Peter Parker, but they know Spider-Man is the way it seems to be. So like the Avengers remember Spider-Man working with them. They remember that he was brought in by Tony Stark, but they don't know who he is how I think that's how it is. So like Doctor Strange will remember having worked with Spider-Man, but he won't remember who Spider-Man was. Which means it could be undone pretty easily just by unmasking. But one of the questions I've got coming out of this is, what the hell's up with Ned? Ned's working a sling ring. Ned's opening portals. Ned's grandma talking about how they got magic. He gets the tingle in his fingers. That might be legit.
And have you heard that the actor who played Ned has lost 100 pounds since they filmed that movie?
I have. I've seen pictures of him. He's got,
I thought he was great in this movie. I would love to see him continue to play Ned Leeds.
Uh-huh.
Especially now that he can do some magic and he's, transforming himself in real life. Like, you're setting yourself up to be a long-term player in this world.
Yep. Well, the Hobgoblin, who Ned Leeds comes in the comics, has some magical ability. He works with, was it Baron Mordo at one point?
Mm-hmm.
So could we be seeing Ned get trained? Because Strange remember that this kid was using a sling ring with no training at all. Also, we have to wonder, when does Steven get the title of a Sorcerer Supreme back? Or does Wong get to keep it?
So, okay. If we're going to jump to the second post-credit scene, I think I know what storyline they're setting up. If you wanted a comic book storyline to tie it to, I think they're going to that direction of Doctor Strange Damnation.
Okay.
Where at the end of it, Doctor Strange regains the title Sorcerer Supreme.
Could be. Yeah.
That seems, because in that story, Doctor Strange has to battle the evil version of himself from the mirror universe. Or, the beardy version of himself if this was Star Trek.
Well, this might be the what if version of Doctor Strange. Because there's been talk that one of the characters from the What If series was going to come to live action. He might be playing the evil version of himself. So I want to answer Sean's question real quick. A question for both of you: is the symbiote hive mind something that crosses over between universes, like Venom is aware of the various universes in Peter Parker's? Yes. In the end credit scene in Venom Let There Be Carnage, the Venom symbiote says that their hive mind crosses universes. So basically, the symbiote exists throughout the multiverses and is connected together. So the reason Tom Hardy comes through isn't because he knew Peter Parker was Spider-Man. It's because the hive mind knew that Peter Parker was Spider-Man because of Topher Grace, because he fought Venom at one point, which gets a drop, a name drop or whatever, when they're talking about the bad guys they fought.
Yeah.
Toby talks about having fought an alien goo. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah. So that's what it is.
Also, Sean Butler, just if you're interested, if you want to know what the Venom hive mind can do, just read anything about the Borg Collective.
Yeah. But so, yes.
Not calling Donny Cates out, but basically the same.
Yeah. Any character, any Venom symbiote throughout the multiverse shares the hive mind, is what they established. So, all right, guys. I think that's going to cover it. I love the movie. I think Kyle liked it, but found some of it disappointing and thought they could have done a little more with it. And that's what is considered a good review from him. But yeah, so coming up next, I believe, is Black Comic Universe.
Actually, I believe we're going to have to take the week off from Black Comics Universe. Imani wanted a fill-in or a repeat, but I don't think it's available in the library. So
Okay.
We may have to take a week off.
All right. So then at 4 p.m. Pacific will be Miss Jen with Minute to Skim It. And that's 7 p.m. Eastern. And then Kyle and I will be back at 5 p.m. Pacific, 8 o'clock Eastern, with In Stores This Week, where we will be talking about books like the new issue of Barbarella, Joy Operation, House of Slaughter, The All-Nighter, the newest issue of The Harbinger, and even Snelson, Comedy is Dying. So lots of great books coming up. Join us in just a couple hours. So stick around for that. Stick around for Miss Jen and Minute to Skim It. And tomorrow we'll be talking The Witcher. Yes, I binged all 8 episodes. I am ready for a spoiler discussion. Join me tomorrow, 2 p.m. right here on The Experience, 5 p.m. Eastern. Good night, everybody.
I wasn't ready for you to be done. Here we go.
Imagine being at a convention and going to an interview panel that's just for you. No bustling crowds, no hours-long lines, just you, the moderator, and your favorite comic book creators. Well, this is pretty much that. Miss Jen sits down every week with 2 comic book creators for a live stream interview about their latest work, and you can ask them whatever you want. It's Talking Shop, Mondays at 5 Eastern on The Experience, Comic Culture